the moment you've all been waiting for, our first application problem. This is going to put everything together that we learned in the previous lesson. So we have a farmer who has 10 acres to plant wheat and rye. Each acre of wheat costs $200 to plant, and each acre of rye costs $100 to plant. He has a total of $1,200 to spend in planting. Each acre of wheat will make $500 profit, and each acre of rye will make a profit of $300. How many acres of each should be planted to maximize the profit? So there's a few things to take into consideration with a problem like this. We'll have our constraints, meaning something that's going to limit what he's doing, because he can't just plant an infinite amount of wheat or rye. You can't just do whatever he wants. There are some constraints, only a certain amount of land and things like that. We also want to make sure that he keeps his costs down, but he also profits as best he can. So let's take a look. We have wheat and we have rye. So why don't we call wheat W and we'll call rye R. Those will be our two variables. And it says he has 10 acres to plant wheat and rye. So if W is the acres of wheat and R is the acres of rye, so wheat acres will be W and rye acres will be R. So those will be our two variables. Well, if each one's the amount of acres for that plant, we'll have W plus R, and he has 10 acres to plant, so he can't go over 10, but it could be equal to 10, so we have to have less than or equal to 10. He also mentioned something about the cost. The wheat costs $200 to plant, the rye costs $100 to plant, and he has a total of $1,200 to spend in planting. Now, so it sounds like we need to put all that into another inequality. Well, if he has $200, it's $200 to plant wheat, so we'll have 200 times the amount of acres of wheat plus $100 for each acre of rye, so 100 times the amount of acres of rye, and he has $1,200 to spend. Well, he can't go over the $1,200, but it could be equal to that $1,200, so it'll be less than or equal to $1,200. The next thing they mentioned would be each acre of wheat will make $500 profit, and each acre of rye will make $300 profit. When we're talking about profit, think about it. We want to maximize our profit. That's our objective. So that's going to be part of our objective function. Let's put that in red. So if I want to do my objective function, I will have, let's see here, 500 for each acre of wheat, so W, plus 300 for each acre of rye, and that's going to be my total profit. So this is my objective function here in red. Now, question for you guys. Are you able to plant a negative amount of acres? No, I don't think so. What we'll have to do is for our last two constraints, now these aren't really listed up here in the problem, so you just kind of have to remember. Sometimes they'll give you some information, but usually you just have to go with W is greater than or equal to 0 and R is greater than or equal to 0. Sometimes you might see something that says they have to plant at least 2 acres of wheat or something like that. That's when you'd end up having W is greater than or equal to 2. But when it doesn't mention it, you just have to make sure that they are 0 or positive. All right, so 0 or positive, because you can't plant a negative amount of acres. The next thing we have to do is we have to graph these. Now, these are lengthy problems, so just stick with it. So we're going to graph these at first. Now we'll use the cover-up method because it's in standard form. So if I cover up this R first, I'm going to have W equals 10. And also we cover up W, R equals 10. So those are my 2 points here and here. Let's connect the dots. And it is a solid line because it's less than or equal to. So that'll be my first one. Boom. And we know that it's less than, so we're shading on this side of the line. That's why I drew those little arrows there. Remember, we did this when we were talking about graphing the feasible region before. Next one. We'll do this one in green. So I have 200W equal or plus 100R is less than or equal to 1200. So for W, I would have to cover up this guy here. When we divide 1200 by 200, we get 6, and that's going to go on our x-axis right there. Then when I cover up this guy here and I'm left with 100R equals 1200, kind of think of this as an equal sign when we're doing this part. So we have 100 equals, or 100r equals 1200. That means that I get 12 for r, which is like our y coordinate. And when I connect those two dots, and you can do those sound effects as well. That's always fun. We get an intersection point that is right here. If we had a straight edge, it would be right at that point there. Alrighty. Next thing we have, we'll do these guys in red. Do both of these in red here. So for w is greater than or equal to 0, that's our vertical one because the w is kind of like our x. And it's shading over here. It's greater than. I did forget about my arrows on the green one. It's less than, so it's shading below. And then lastly, for the r is greater than or equal to 0, that's our horizontal one because that's like our y equals 0. And we're shading above because it's greater than. And we can see now our feasible region would be right in here. Here's our feasible region, right in this area here. So remember, our corner points are all the corners of that feasible region. So here's one, that's 0, 0. Here's another, that is 0, 10. And then here's another, which is 2, 8. And the last one, 6, 0. All right. So now, how do I get the value of my objective function? Well, that's actually not too difficult. I'm going to take these points, I'm going to plug them into my objective function, the one's going to tell me the profit. If I plug in 0, 0, meaning I plant 0 wheat and 0 rye, I'm going to get $0. That makes sense, right? If I'm not going to plant any money or any crops, I ain't going to get no money. Alrighty. If I plug in 0 for W and 10 for R, I'm going to have 3,000. 3 G's, yo. If I plug in 2, 8, I'm going to have 3,400. And then lastly, if I plug in 6 for W and 0 for R, 500 times 6 gives me 3,000. So if I'm thinking how many acres of each should be planted to maximize my profit, that would be 2 acres of wheat and 8 acres of rye. Woo! And the profit that I'm going to get there would be 3,400. So another question I could ask would be, what's the max profit that you could get? That would be 3,400. Or if I ask you how many acres of each should be planted to maximize profit, that would be the 2.8. Boom. Done.